Welcome back to my channel. Hey everyone. When I first arrived in the United Kingdom, everything felt new, strange, and a little too quiet. The air was crisp, the skies were often gray, and the sound of unfamiliar voices filled every street corner. I had imagined that moving here would feel like stepping into a dream, a charming land of cobblestone paths, cozy cafes, and polite smiles. But in truth, it felt more like waking up in someone else's story where I didn't yet know my role. I remember standing at the train station on my first morning, suitcase in hand, surrounded by people who all seemed to have somewhere to go. Their accents flowed like music, and though I could understand every word, I felt invisible among them, an observer in a play, waiting for my first line. The quiet of my new apartment didn't help either. The walls seemed to echo with memories that weren't mine. Evenings felt long, and the ticking of the clock became my only companion. I tried reading, I tried listening to the radio, but still, the loneliness lingered, a soft ache in the heart that words couldn't quite fill. Yet somewhere between the rain tapping against my window and the golden glow of a street lamp outside, I began to wonder. Perhaps what I needed wasn't more silence, but something or someone to share it with. That thought became the spark. I told myself I would step outside, even if it was just to join a small club, a class, or a group of strangers doing something they loved. It wasn't courage exactly. It was more like a quiet curiosity, a whisper telling me that connection begins with movement. So one chilly Saturday, wrapped in my favorite scarf, I walked into a local community center. The air inside was warm, filled with laughter, the soft clatter of brushes, and the scent of freshly brewed tea. It was an art workshop, and I, who had never painted before, found myself holding a brush as if it were a lifeline. At first, my strokes were uncertain, my colors unsure. But then, as I listened to others talk, laugh, and share stories of their week, something in me shifted. I realized hobbies weren't just pastimes. They were invitations, small doorways to the human heart. Someone leaned over to compliment my clumsy painting, and I laughed, embarrassed yet grateful. For the first time in weeks, I felt seen. That moment was the beginning. I didn't know it then, but each class, each shared cup of tea, each kind word would slowly weave a sense of belonging. The loneliness didn't disappear overnight, no. It softened, melted into something gentler, something almost sweet. I began to find joy not just in the art itself, but in the people around me, in their accents, their humor, their warmth. Hobbies became my bridge into a new world, a way of speaking without fear, and perhaps, without realizing it, the first step toward finding love. And so it was that, in a foreign land, with a brush in hand and a hopeful heart, I began to paint my new beginning. It was one of those afternoons when the rain seemed to fall endlessly, the kind that makes even the brightest streets look like they're sighing under gray skies. A day that just begs for quiet reflection, maybe even a touch of melancholy. The clouds were so low, they looked like they were tired, just resting on the rooftops. I remember watching raindrops race down the window, each one chasing the other in a silent little contest. I could have stayed inside, wrapped in a blanket, but something inside me, this quiet little voice, just said, Go find something beautiful, even in this rain. So, with my umbrella fighting against the wind, I walked through these narrow streets until I saw it, the little community art studio. The windows were all fogged up, but I could see shapes moving inside, people laughing, brushes tapping, and just this explosion of color. The doorbell chimed softly as I pushed the door open, and the warmth of the room just wrapped around me like an old friend. The smell of paint mixed with the faint aroma of tea, and I felt this strange sense of home, even though I'd never been there before. The instructor, a really kind woman with a soft voice and a smile that genuinely reached her eyes, handed me a brush. I stood there, completely clueless. I had no idea what to paint. My hands felt clumsy, my mind was just blank. But as I dipped the brush into a pool of blue paint, I realized how calming it was to just move color across a blank page. It was like it silenced all the noise in my head. Around me, everyone was lost in their own little world of imagination. And then, just as I lifted my brush for the second stroke, I felt it, that tiny moment when everything just shifts. Across the table, a stranger caught my eye. His smile was quiet, easy, almost like he knew I was feeling both nervous and completely enchanted by this whole experience. He said something lighthearted about the rain, about how it made the colors look brighter through the window. His voice was so gentle, with that classic British rhythm that just makes words sound softer, more thoughtful. I smiled back, not sure if it was because of what he said or just the way his words made the air feel warmer. We started talking just in little bits and pieces between our brushstrokes. Nothing deep at first, just laughing over our messy lines and our shared lack of skill. But somewhere in those small moments, a connection started to bloom. I began to notice the little things, like the way the light caught the edge of his hair, or the way he'd tilt his head when he was listening. Every one of those details became part of the picture I was painting, not just with color, but with feeling. By the time the class ended, the rain had softened to a quiet drizzle. I stepped outside, my painting tucked under my arm, and he walked with me to the door. We didn't make any big promises or exchange long goodbyes. It was just a smile and a soft, "See you next week," and somehow that was more than enough. It was enough to make the world feel lighter, enough to make the sound of the rain feel almost like music. That rainy afternoon, with nothing more than a brush, a canvas, and a stranger's smile, my story started to change. It all started with something as simple as an invitation. At the end of art class, he turned to me and asked, "Would you like to join us for tea this afternoon?" His voice had this soft politeness that just makes it impossible to say no. Honestly, I hesitated at first. Tea gatherings seemed so wonderfully, perfectly British, and I was worried my clumsy small talk would give me away. But there was a warmth in his tone, a quiet curiosity that made me say yes before I could overthink it. And so, on a gentle afternoon with sunlight filtering through pale clouds, I found myself in a small cafe. The air was filled with the clink of porcelain cups and the sound of laughter, all blending together like an old, familiar melody. This ritual of afternoon tea was completely new to me. There was something so tender about the way time seemed to slow down. The delicate sound of spoons against china, the graceful way he poured the milk, the careful spreading of jam on scones that were still warm from the oven. The conversation just flowed. It wasn't rushed or loud, but steady and sincere. We talked about art, about the weirdly charming British weather, and all the little things that made us both laugh. I found myself listening not just to his words, but to the quiet pauses in between. You know, those moments that can reveal so much more than speech ever could. Tea quickly became our weekly habit, our quiet pause in the middle of our busy lives. With every meeting, our friendship grew deeper. What started as polite company soon blossomed into something far more comfortable, like settling into your favorite chair by the fire, familiar, safe, and just quietly joyful. I started to notice how the world outside seemed softer after our talks. The colors in my paintings became brighter, and even the rain felt a little less lonely. It was on one of those afternoons, somewhere between sips of Earl Grey and gentle laughter, that he brought up tennis. "You should come play," he said, smiling in that teasing way that tells you he already knows your answer. I laughed, telling him I hadn't held a racket since I was in school, but his confidence was completely contagious. The next morning, there I was, standing on a green court with the wind in my hair and the sun glinting on the net. The game started off so awkwardly. I think we spent more time laughing than actually playing. My serves were wild, my aim was all over the place, but he cheered me on like I was some kind of champion. We ran, we stumbled, and we laughed until our sides literally ached. Every time the ball went flying off in the wrong direction, we'd chase it down together, and somehow, all those clumsy little moments felt like pieces of something truly beautiful. It was never really about the game itself. It was about being seen, about being known in that simple rhythm of shared joy. Afterward, as we sat on the bench catching our breath, he handed me a bottle of water and smiled. "You're better than you think," he said softly. And in that moment, I realized he wasn't talking about tennis anymore. That day, somewhere between tea and tennis, conversation and laughter, I discovered that friendship, much like love, doesn't begin with grand gestures. It begins with simple, genuine moments of connection. Start of script, the morning was wrapped in that soft stillness that only the early hours seem to hold. You know that feeling when the world is just half awake, the air is crisp, and the ground is still glistening from the night's rain. I'd recently taken up jogging, not really for the fitness, but more for the profound peace it brought to my soul. There's something incredibly soothing about the steady rhythm of your own footsteps, the faint whisper of wind against your face, and the quiet hum of life beginning anew. The park near my home had become my little sanctuary, a place where my thoughts could wander as freely as the birds skimming across the lake's surface. That particular morning, I wasn't searching for anything, just a sense of calm. But life, as it so often does, had other plans for me. As I rounded a corner, passing beneath a beautiful canopy of chestnut trees, I caught sight of a familiar figure up ahead. There was a lightness in his stride, a confidence I'd seen before, in the way he held a paintbrush, the way he laughed over a cup of tea, the way he made the most ordinary things feel absolutely extraordinary. For a moment, I thought it was just a trick of the early morning light, that my mind was simply conjuring comfort from a fond memory. But as I drew closer, he turned, and a spark of recognition flickered between us, that sudden connection that erases all distance and time in a single glance. "Good morning," he called out, his voice carrying that same cheerful tone that had once filled the art studio where we first met. I laughed, feeling a little breathless, surprised but oddly delighted by this unexpected reunion. "I didn't expect to see you here," I said, trying to steady both my breath and my thoughts, which were suddenly racing. "Nor I," he replied, smiling in that way that always seemed to soften the air around him. "But I suppose the park is big enough for both of us, unless, of course, you plan to outrun me." It started as a joke, but soon we found ourselves running side by side, our laughter mixing with the easy rhythm of our steps. The conversation flowed as easily as it always had. We spoke of little things, the weather, the fresh smell of rain on the earth, the promise of spring just around the corner, but beneath those simple words, something unspoken was growing, something that neither of us dared to name just yet. With every mile we covered, the space between us grew quieter, yet somehow more intimate. The silence wasn't empty. It was full of a shared understanding, of the quiet awareness that something gentle and undeniable had begun to take root. We were building a connection, step by step, one stride at a time. When we finally stopped, breathless and smiling, we stood by the lake, watching the morning light shimmer across the water. The world around us felt perfectly still, as if it was holding its breath just for us. He gently brushed a loose strand of hair from my face, a small gesture, but one that carried all the tenderness that words could never express. In that simple, quiet touch, I felt the truth of it, that love doesn't always arrive with grand declarations or at the perfect time. Sometimes it finds you in your emotion, between breaths, on an ordinary morning when you least expect it. That day, as the sun broke through the clouds and our reflections rippled side by side in the water, I realized I hadn't just been running through the park, I had been running straight into love. Have you ever noticed how time softens our memories, leaving just the moments that truly mattered? When I look back on my time in the UK, I see more than just a calendar of days. I see a beautiful tapestry of moments, all stitched together with laughter, learning, and the quiet discovery of where I belong. It all started as a way to fill the emptiness of my early days here. But what began as a simple distraction soon turned into something so much deeper. It became a healing journey, a bridge connecting who I was with the person I was becoming. I used to think hobbies were just small, ordinary things, just ways to pass the time, but I learned they are so much more. A simple art class didn't just teach me to paint, it opened my heart to connection. A shared cup of tea wasn't just about the warmth in my hands, it taught me the warmth of conversation. A game of tennis wasn't just about hitting a ball, it taught me the pure joy of being in motion. Each hobby held its own lesson, each moment a precious gift. They weren't distractions from life. They were asterisk life, quietly teaching me how to listen, how to speak, and even how to love. Painting taught me patience. It showed me that beauty doesn't just appear in a flash, it grows, layer by layer, just like trust. Reading aloud to a friend gave me confidence, not just with my English, but in how I express myself. I started to hear the music and the language, the rhythm, the warmth, the way words could wrap around an emotion and make it real. It stopped being about perfect grammar and became about feeling, about letting my voice find its place in this new world. And when he listened, really asterisk listened, I realized something profound. Language isn't about being perfect. It's about connection. Even the smallest moments became bridges between us. Sharing a laugh over a word I completely mispronounced, trying to mimic the rolling R's of a British accent, or explaining the meaning of a phrase I just read in a book. We learned from each other, but more than that, we healed in each other's company. The loneliness that once shadowed me began to fade, replaced by the gentle comfort of having someone by my side. Through these shared hobbies, I didn't just learn to speak English more fluently, I learned how to speak from my heart. As time went on, I saw it everywhere. Hobbies are these invisible threads that weave people together, crossing cultures, languages, and all our fears. They remind us that deep down, we're all looking for the same things: understanding, belonging, and a space where we can just be ourselves. They give us courage when words fail, joy when days feel heavy, and love when we least expect it. So as I stand here today, I carry all the colors of that journey with me, the laughter, the accents, the quiet kindness of every shared moment. I came to the UK to learn a language, but through the simple act of doing things I loved, I discovered something so much greater. Hobbies didn't just fill my time, they filled my life. They healed me, connected me, and taught me that love, just like language, is always best learned through the heart. Thank you so much for watching and sharing this journey with me. If this story resonated with you, please give it a like and consider subscribing for more stories from the heart. See you next time.